Good morning. I'm Victor Mastone. I'm the retired state underwater archaeologist, retired president of the Mass Archaeological Society, jack of all trades.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dr. Calvin Myers. Glad to see everybody. I've said the names, but I'm going to probably go back around again. I do different things. I teach at Bridgewater State as well as Stonehill College. We have a summer field school in Salem. Do research out of Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute as well as Stow. And then some might be interested too. I travel around a lot working with the Department of Defense. They have a small little program called DPAA, Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. So in 2 weeks I'll be in Thailand looking for a B-24 that had 15 people on board. And their whole mission is to do a full accounting to recover and then repatriate and bury those that are lost at sea. We still have 80,000 service people unaccounted for. So where I say all that is because we're going to show you today basics, but those basics will be taking those to the field in some degree in 2 weeks. And so you're really going to be learning by the end of the day some actual techniques that we use on our field schools, and it can be scaled up to more complicated equipment. So this is a really good introduction to it. We'll do the talkie part first and try to get that out of the way to kind of get a sense of it, what makes it different than maritime archaeology or archaeology different than just diving. And I don't know, has anybody done scuba diving? All right. So here's my thing with scuba divers. When I work with scuba divers, they really, really know how to dive. And then I tell them not to dive. And they go, wait, what are you talking about? Because it's a very different skill set. It's basically not diving. It's doing work with the scuba equipment onto that. And it's really funny. And we go through these techniques and like, oh, we can do it like this and this. And I'm like, go ahead. And then it's an interesting kind of shift on that. So that's one of the reasons we talk about it from this introduction to foreshore and underwater archaeology, and really grateful to have you guys here as we go through this, and maybe kind of being that stepping stone to, we can come back and run it again, and you can tell people about this, because again, it's not just the diving part about it, it's really connecting the history with the diving, with the story to pass it on, not for yourself, and no present company, but a lot of times when I speak with divers, they're very passionate about their adventures and they'll tell you about their story, but really what we're trying to figure out is how to communicate the people who lost their lives and their stories as well as the community as well. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts, and I say all that right up front because sometimes I get this question like, well, so why what's the point? And I think that's a really good question. And I don't want to spend a whole semester talking about that. I just want to say that as we show you these things, there's lots of reasons and a lot of contributions that the field really can provide, and it does it in a really cool way. So,
basically, what you get today is half of a workshop. You're getting the sort of the classroom side versus the hands-on side. Though we'll do a little hands-on, and this is a compression of our 40-hour course, which is at Salem State's a 1-week course because of the way they teach in the summer, but generally this would be a semester course. But you're going to get probably a good half of it in day one, and hopefully we'll find a convenient site to do day two. Still, I have one, but I'm working on the possibilities of another. I'm looking for easy access, and we're not going to dive, so that's not the issue.
I will say this about Vic, he was very humble. I talked a lot, so I'll talk for him too. He has over 35 plus years of, 40 years? I don't want to get too much of in this. Okay.
No, 40 years.
Okay, in the state. No one knows more about wrecks in Massachusetts than he does, and he's seen it all develop, come and go, so he's a repository of witticisms, information, and a couple cynicisms and good jokes here and there. So.
I don't know the answer, I make them up.
Yeah.
Should we go into slide number?
Let's have slide 1, slide 2, yeah. Sure.
So this is the introduction to maritime archaeology. And you'll notice, we'll talk about this a little bit further on, we tend to use certain terms a lot, and maritime archaeology is sort of the all-encompassing term for what we do, because we do stuff on the shoreline, as the British call it the foreshore, We do underwater. I do work in rivers, lakes. I'm doing a lake project now with the Nipmuc Indians in a dugout canoes. They have 3 that we know of. But maritime archaeology is a broad topic, but we'll sort of get into how people really get more interested in it.
So this is kind of that, as Vic talked about it, and this is what is maritime archaeology? As we go through, that's the second question I usually get, and the third one is, how do you get into this? So some of these slides, as we go through, a lot of people think shipwrecks, right? Diving on them, that's why I was taking a look at them going down, and that's true. Then you get treasure, right? And probably if I say, think of a shipwreck, does it look like that? It does have that name on it. Did anybody think of Titanic? If you ever want to blow middle schoolers' minds, do this, where you go into a 5th and 6th grade class and say, think of a shipwreck, I can read your mind, I know what it is, and you pull Titanic up. And they'll be like, oh my God, how did you know that? Because it's always Titanic. It's always Titanic, and it's not the most historic ship, but it comes with the most kind of compelling mythology. And there's quite a bit of that. So shipwrecks, can be storytelling. And then the other one is like, oh, do you see sharks? And I always put this one up. I call this guy Smiley. I was on a project. And you see all the bait fish up here? And when we were down, it was actually from a World War II freighter. And they cast a shadow until something big comes. And then the bigger the prey, the more they open up. And so when I felt the sun hit me on the back, and it was like, uh-oh. So I turned around. It's a sand tiger, and they actually look fierce. They're in aquariums. They're in the New England Aquarium, but they're pretty docile. But still, when you're staring at them, kind of looking, going, what are you going to do? That was one of my favorite pictures, because he just stared. He just was like, and they just look at you, and you're like, this is awkward. So we have the sea. There's a lot of pleasure. And all of these are different types of fields that you can get into out of archaeology. And you notice that maritime archaeology is a subfield of archaeology, right? So that's the thing. It's not about the diving. It's really what archaeology is. Vic, go ahead. I'll let you.
I was going to say,
yeah.
If you look at these, they kind of overlap. Out of all of these, the only thing I haven't done is biblical yet. Never know. And my classical is I got to work on Cleopatra's palace on shore in a discussion group with the Egyptian government. So it wasn't really like real archaeology. Beyond that, you kind of cross these fields naturally. Even though for me professionally, I've worked in prehistoric, which is now called pre-contact. We have to update the slides.
Oh yeah, this is very European. This is very this is very European.
But also, it's an organic field. Our field develops. Any new technology changes our field.
Yeah. So and that's kind of a lot of the techniques that we'll do were borrowed all the way through and adapted for the different environment.
Yeah. I always think of archaeologists as we're the best stealers or adapters of somebody else's technology. You develop something, we'll find a way to use it.
And so that's kind of why we have this slide right here, right? We're foundationally, we're talking about what is maritime archaeology. We know it's at the sea. We're dealing with things that people are left behind. But has anybody ever taken archaeology or archaeology camps? If I asked you what archaeology...
Confess.
Yeah, no? What do you think archaeology is? Yeah. Okay.
The study of ancient artifacts, or not ancient, but artifacts from a time.
Yeah, the study of artifacts from a time. That's good, yeah.
And then try to understand like past human culture and history.
Yeah. Now let's combine, yeah,
Through
there you go. That's exactly right. That,
oral or written history.
Right.
yeah, one thing it's not though is dinosaurs.
Paleontology.
Yeah, that's paleontology, and I get this all. Even my family will send me things on the new latest archaeological discovery of a dinosaur, and there's a reason for that. Can anybody tell me why we're not paleontologists?
It's not human.
Well, but we do study animals sometimes, ecofacts. But you're on the right track, actually. It's not human, but we study mammoths. What's that?
Not human era.
Right, by about 15 million years. I will say, when we talk about that, but we're actually closer to Tyrannosaurus rex than other dinosaurs were to Tyrannosaurus rex. It's crazy how long dinosaurs are around. They just didn't interact with humans. Now, we do deal with paleozoology, ancient animals like mammoths, mastodons, hunter and gatherers, and paleosites.
Yeah, you want that head? Sure.
Go ahead. But archaeology is the official definition. It's here in a sec. Go ahead.
Right.
I like
But
that.
you will, and I will,
Yeah.
you say that and just, I have worked on sites where there are fossils, and the speculation is were the Native Americans collecting these, or they just happen to be lots of these fossils, because they're in areas where you'd find a lot of fossils, but they are always in the site. So there could be a connection with humans, but not the way that we would think of them as archaeologists. You know, it's really the study of the past, human behavior, through material culture. Artifacts of material culture. Also, when we find botanical remains, wooden remains, and that's all part of that broad definition of material culture. If someone could have used it, did use it, that's how we look at artifacts or objects.
So, as Vic just said, we'll take a look at some of those examples of artifacts. And it's a good combination of both of your definitions. The artifacts don't tell you what's going on. They're evidence, right? It's really the job of the archaeologist to look at that, and we'll talk in some slides of context. You'll hear us say context is so important. That's why we don't like people moving things, because everything in this room currently has a story to tell. If we weren't here, whatever remains would indicate what we were talking about. But you start to remove or you start to maneuver things, that story changes. Now, clearly we know what the story is because we have the context of being here. That's our context. We're living it. But what about 10,000 years ago? 12,000 years ago? Do you know what story that is? No. You have to rely on the evidence. And it's really the archaeologist who does this. And so some other definitions. The study of human past through material remains. We saw the interpretation of the past through the study of things modified or manufactured by humans, not just man. Again, this is very English. You can see that's just a lot more words. But I like this one, that archaeology is rubbish. We like other people's garbage. Right? The older the garbage, the better it is. So right now I'm not as interested in our garbage. That's garbology, that's pollution. But eventually if it gets buried, which it will, and it gets cycled in 1,000 years, they start to pull up stratigraphy from our era. I already know, if they know the term, what they're going to call us. So there's the Stone Age, Bronze Age, very rough ages, right? Iron, Modern Age. Anybody want to guess what we might be called as a culture?
Plastic
You
age.
guys nailed it. You nailed it. My students at college are like, computer age, digital age. No, digital information is not going to last beyond the last battery, right? Whenever electricity goes out, all of our collective knowledge is gone. When your power goes out on those nor'easters, and you're sitting there, you might have a generator. Why do you have a generator? So you have electricity. But if you don't have that, you're watching your connection to the world get lost. But what remains, you guys nailed it. The material is plastic. We are the plastic age. It will last beyond us. It's incorporated in everything. They'll find it in the environment. They'll find it in our own DNA because we're absorbing it. And they're like, you guys really like plastic. Right? And so
I do.
that will be our future contribution, interestingly enough. So coming back to this. We've talked about archaeology. I didn't mention this. I used to teach Latin and Greek, so whenever I can, I throw it up there just because it's the only chance I get to use it. Archaeos meaning first or old, or logos meaning to study. We study old first principles, but what about the sea? And this is where we come in. Vic. You could go click to the next one. I think you'll recognize that.
Well, we really think about other objects. And the things that people don't, it's here some implied, so like shipwreck archaeology, it's all about shipwrecks, nautical,
Yeah.
sort of like the evolution, underwater tends to, oh yeah, that's
Sorry.
right. More
There you go.
stuff.
Some cues there.
And it's funny that when I look at that, I tend to think of it as physically what was used. What am I studying? So if I'm studying a shipwreck, I don't think about so much as it's a vessel as much as it's a big machine. Just think about the biggest machines in the world are aircraft carriers. That's the largest thing, the definition of machine. But here it's really what I'm concentrating on. So we tend to talk about maritime. Is that on the next slide? No, we don't do a definition of maritime on their version.
No, it's like the scientific study of seafaring. We might have it up there. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
but it's really, it's what happens. So when I'm looking at a shipwreck site, I'm always asking questions about why is it here? Why did it end up here? So for example, the one we might look at the city of Rockland, it wasn't a shipwreck. They dragged it on that beach because it was on fire, and they were going to use it in, I think, in a movie at that point. They'd filmed it a lot.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, there's all these different stories we haven't kind of nailed down, but it wasn't a wreck in the true sense of it was an accident. Because when we think of shipwrecks, we think of accidents. And not all losses are accidents. Some are on purpose, you know, they scuttle vessels all the time. Especially up here, it used to be how to get rid of old fishing boats was, quote, to sink them. Though I think there's a lot of mythology to that as well, because we find a lot of them in the inlets, or bits and pieces of them now. Nautical archaeology really talks about the development of vessels. That's really what they're thinking about when they say the term nautical archaeology. How do they build a ship? How do they design it? What is that human factor that goes in? What are those techniques? And you'll see a lot of this now in a lot of the sort of nautical history magazines where they'll show you, we're in Guam and they're showing you how they put together one of the vessels there, or in the Caribbean. And still, you're looking at technique. And then, of course, underwater archaeology, really, it's because it's underwater. And I'm looking at it, dugout canoes now, but my goal is always hopefully to find submerged sites, because we have a lot of, not just because of sea level rise, but there's a lot of places where damming occurred and no one ever looked at those sites before they dammed, so there could be information there. Man, there's a lot of shipwrecks out there. And what do we mean by a shipwreck too? It's like their definition, they never really tell you, like here.
I know, it's one of the stats that I'm like, how did you figure that out?
Yeah.
But I use it because it's UNESCO.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I always think
so-
about if you buy shipwreck books, you know, local inventories, actually when you look down, most of the time the vessels are of a certain tonnage, like 100 tons. If they're 100 tons, you don't hear anything about it unless, you know, some wealthy person owned a schooner and it sank, you know, their private yacht or something. Other than that, it's not recorded.
This is the official definition, but not of maritime archaeology. But yeah, Vic, I think you were on most of these, right, Vic?
No, I haven't been on them. I mean, I've read a lot about them, but I don't like to be in the water. And this is an impressive list for just Cape Cod.
Yeah.
Probably Massachusetts as a whole is about 5,000 wrecks.
Yeah.
However, how do you define what a shipwreck is? We'll talk about that, but most of these are one type of vessel. Two or three, I shouldn't say two types, 2 or 3 masted fishing schooners or coal and lumber schooners. That's it. They're just working boats. There are a few very spectacular wrecks in Massachusetts. Some are always talked, this is the Titanic of Massachusetts, and there's like 3 of those. And I get upset when I see one list and I go like, there's more death on this other vessel. There's more drama on this other vessel, but it's whoever that author is. And people don't realize that there has been some real calamities here, and it's not just the loss of the port. Before and after, there have been calamities, and sometimes a calamity isn't hundreds of people. It might be 10 people, but it's what that had to do with society at the time. So like the watch and wait off of Gloucester, the wreck of the Hesperus is inspired by that loss. So it has an impact beyond the wreck itself.
So we just had that official definition of a shipwreck, and I'd like everybody to repeat it back to me right now. Right. I wasn't expecting that, because it's a mouthful, and it's technical. But here's how I view a shipwreck. It's a failure, a mistake, and a loss. Stop right there. A ship, as Vic said, is a machine. It's an artifact. It's the most complex artifact out there, but it's still a piece of technology. And when I talk to students, I try to break it down to the simplest terms that you can relate to. As a people, we make mistakes. It's a failure, it's a loss. And everybody has made a mistake and a failure and a loss. And again, Whether it's failing your exam or trying to turn in your paper on Google Docs or on the computer and everything crashes. And then you have to email the teacher, say, I was almost done when something happened. Or it's when you're battering on your phone as it's dying, as you're trying to talk to somebody, or there's an emergency and you can't get cell reception. We've all had a similar experience in which technology has let us down at the most crucial moment, and we've all experienced that sinking feeling in our gut of, oh, F. Why now? Why now? That's all a shipwreck is, but in the most dramatic terms. You're watching failure occur while the water comes in, but it's still a failure. So while you're sitting there and you're like, it seems esoteric, it seems far away, it seems exotic, it's not. And therefore, a shipwreck.
We changed.
What?
I have a comment on this picture
Yeah,
before we go to the
yeah,
next one.
so absolutely. And I know where you're going with this, so I'll turn it over to you. A train wreck is also a failure. And I'm going to transition here a little bit, and everybody seems to watch a train wreck,
Yeah.
right? And this is why things slow down when there's a car accident. It doesn't even have to be a big one. It's rubbernecking. It's, oh, what happened right there? Go ahead, Vic.
No, you're seeing the failure, but the failure becomes,
There you go.
I unfortunately call it entertainment. Everybody goes down, and they're not going down there to help anybody. I have an image that we don't have on this of a wreck on off of Kings Beach in Lynn. And there's all these people on the shore, and the wreck is off, and it's probably by Egg Rock or something, and it looks horrible. And the question is, what are these people doing? They're not there. They are not the lighthouse keepers and the life-saving service. They came down because that was their entertainment. That was something to do. Plus, they might get something. They might float off the boat, and you take it. I'll make an allusion to that later on about finders keepers. But that's why I like this image, is because all the carriages are there. I have another one from 1909 for the Jenny M. Carter on Salisbury Beach. If you know Salisbury Beach at all, right where the highway ends and the frolics and all the entertainment, there's a wreck there, and they had to run extra cable cars from Newburyport to go down there so people could see the wreck. All right, now I'll give it back to you.
So, speaking of that, and
Yeah.
this is one I always show as the ultimate failure. Has anybody heard of the Vasa?
I think I've been to that museum.
It's in Stockholm. So if in Stockholm, I bet this is their like iconic. It's a Statue of Liberty. Those are iconic tourist, not trap. It's well beyond. It's beyond expectations. It's well worth it if you're there. Has anybody ever seen Pirates of the Caribbean? Old movie now. I keep saying that unless of my students have, and I'm like, oh, that's right. It's 22 years old. But the Black Pearl is Vasa. It was modeled off of Vasa. Now, Vasa is a magnificent ship. It was built in 1627. It had its maiden voyage in 1628 and made it less than about a quarter mile off the dock before it fell over and sank on its maiden voyage. Be like an USS aircraft carrier leaving New York City, waving to the Statue of Liberty and going no further. An ultimate failure. Even worse, I use the analogy of an aircraft carrier, it was the flagship for the King of Sweden. Now, fun fact, at this time, in the 1600s, Sweden was a powerhouse. It was a maritime world power. You know, the world was different then. And they were in a bit of a fight up in the North Atlantic with the Polish king as well. And the King of Sweden wanted to have the Vasa as his warship. Problem, the shipwright designed it with 2 gun decks. That wouldn't satisfy the king, who wanted to, of course, compete and have an extra gun deck. So he ordered a 3rd gun deck. Problem, shipwright had already started construction and said, if you raise another gun deck, it shifts gravity. That's going to be a problem for sailing. King said, I'm a king. Shipwright said, 3rd deck on the way. He died during the building of that. That's important because sure enough, as they did the trials, they started to run back and forth. That's how you test balance, and it didn't take long for it to wobble, and they stopped the trial before it could keep going. So this is bad. Well, we'll see how it goes. came along, out off the dock into the archipelago. Wind came through, tipped it over. The gun ports were open. The water came in and sank in less before its main voyage. An ultimate failure and embarrassment, right? Oh, and pretty much the king's fault, but since he was the king, the scapegoat was the dead shipwright, who knew better, but they blamed it on the middle management. It was discovered in 1950 and raised 99% intact. And that was the holy grail of maritime archaeology as far as a complete ship because of that ultimate failure. So archaeology, go ahead, Vic.
I just put it onto that
Yeah.
one.
So I'll come to this and we'll see it because we're going to talk more than just about shipwrecks. But archaeology, maritime, it's not always a failure. There's reasons that things are abandoned or built, but more often than not, it's a very human combination of pride, ego, and mistakes. So in that, though, ships are so cool. Vic talked about coal and granite schooners coming back and forth, but they're like the semi-trucks. They're what I call the Walmarts of the day. Right? We didn't have Amazon delivering things to us. What we had were large cargo ships. And they would pack in food, natural resources, iron, anything that one country had, and they would take it like Uber Eats or DoorDash to another port, and they would exchange things. And so you'd have a cultural mixture, and then they would take that to the next port. And sometimes it was awesome, and sometimes it was awful. Slaves. The triangle trade was raw material, slaves, rum, right? So it depended on what was going on. But when it goes down, it just doesn't represent that one moment. It represents a series of moments encapsulated in this large artifact and machine. So it's part of a system, and these are some reasons why these stick around.
And I could read this to you, but I won't. But basically, it's this movement that people think of. We talk about the global economy today. It's always been global. Things have always been. We just don't see the bigger picture. The fact of the matter is that if it wasn't available where you were, you got it from someone else because, hey, salt's great. I like pepper. Look at when Salem became wealthy over pepper. People don't really realize that. They always talk about the China trade. It's pepper, was spices. But what is important about archaeological sites is we don't always see that physical remains. We don't know what was really being transported. And looking at the underwater sites, we start to see what's being moved. An example right now for me, I work for a wind farm company, probably not much longer. Thank you, Big Red. And that can go, I don't care if he hears. What we did is we took soil samples. And we were looking at shipwrecks, but soil samples, we look at the pollen. And that pollen can tell us what the environments were like, or what people were eating, depending on what time period you're looking at. So we can tell anything from an ancient forest fire or a fire pit to, in the 1600s, they were growing corn here in the Northeast. So they tell us a lot. The preservation is there that helps us understand the past.
And some of the reasons for this, when we look at a wreck, and again, why is it important just for our knowledge base outside of just connecting to humanity? First of all, the water environment protects it simply for access. It's really just out of how many people are divers, 2 out of 8 of us here. So you have limited disturbance if the conditions are right, and that's an important part. Down here you can see textiles, which are organic, skin, plants, woods, all of this material that really deteriorate pretty fast can be found in wetlands or in underwater environments if the conditions are right. Just like Vasa I just showed you, the conditions were perfect, and I'll describe them here. I'll keep kind of teasing it out here, but what were the conditions? Well, they were good enough to preserve a human brain for 400 years. When they uncovered a Vasa, they uncovered sails of cloth that deteriorate immediately when it's exposed to air, and rope, and organics that were stored because they didn't have time to and sure enough, there was about 11, maybe 12 people and one puppy, that always hits hardest. I know, right? I say 11, 12, you're like, and I say a puppy, and you're like, right, there was a dog on board, animals, and that always hits really hard too. I have to admit myself when I say it. And one, the skull, and when they brought the person up, it was still there. And I had a chance to feel it, and if you want to know what a brain from 400 years, I really don't know what a brain from today feels like. It was spongy. That's all I got. It was just, yeah, and that's kind of the reaction. Why? Well, because if the conditions are right, the vasa sank and it goes into a mud, and it's like Pompeii. It's a cement encapsulation, or a mud encapsulation, and it blocks out oxygen. It's anaerobic. And even on sites that are in the water, there's a stability that occurs after the process of wrecking, and it requires some chemical processes of site formation to break it down. But if the mud gets there, then it's not going to be disturbed, and that's why Vasa was so well preserved. It was right in the middle of Stockholm Harbor. There were ships going all around it, but it sunk down in the mud deep enough not to be disturbed. And that anaerobic environment, that's where we would look for. Or freshwater environment like the canoes. So the Great Lakes, the ponds around here is a great spot for indigenous sites, like
Right.
what you're working on. Yeah.
It's both the lack of oxygen, but also the cold. Because you
Yes.
get fewer critters that would then find it a place to go chew on the shipwreck.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
know,
Yeah.
We don't have wood borers in our freshwater ponds, for example, but it's that different environment that creates the ability for preservation. So I think a really good example is in Denmark, and I believe they're probably about 2,000 or 4,000-year-old sites where they have uncovered these in the marshes. They have color paint on the wood. You can see the decorations, so that if the right conditions are, you get more information. We think of the past as everything's just plain black
It's all
and
black
white.
and white.
It must have been really colorful. People today, we're enthralled with color. In the past, they would have. I mean, we know that from the medieval ships were well decorated, but earlier cultures would have had the same thing. We're not the only ones who invented this. Do you want to go?
Yeah. Yes. So we're going next.
Nope, wrong one. That will help.
So we've talked about ships, and in the curriculum, we kind of actually mentioned it throughout. There's all different types of archaeological sites. It's okay
Yeah.
because what we really want to go to, we'll teach you how to do the techniques for this. But what Vic has and I've really worked on. We go to the next. Yeah. You know what?
doing something.
One of my presentations, I had a timer on. I've never been able to get it off when I print, so this is that one. And it shows a variation of locations. And I will say this is what I'm working at Woods Hole very much on, is that instead of looking at the ship, what's going on in the environment? How's the ship impacted the environment? How's the environment impacted the ship? So we can go deep water, shallow, and you have different processes, right? And you've heard about these with coral reefs. Deep water reefs, shallow reefs, preservation of reefs. Well, here's an interesting part. Is coral reefs require iron to really grow. In the Pacific, you have a lot of the World War II ships. This one's on the surface, but just an iron hull sunk a major coral reef. One of the most famous dive sites in the world is called Truk Lagoon, or Chuk Lagoon, in the Pacific between Hawaii and Guam. And in 1944, there was a project called Operation Hailstone, which sometimes is referred to as Japan's Pearl Harbor. Not quite the same. It wasn't a surprise. Our scout planes saw 60 to 100 of their larger ships in this lagoon. And it was a race to get back to our fleet and for the Japanese to get their fleet out. And at the end of it, 60 ships were sunk by the American planes. It sits in the middle of one of the precious coral reefs, and just last year, oil leaked out of one of them. It's been 80 years. These ships go down, and they weren't clean. They were World War II fighting carriers. They have oil, they have diesel, they have all those other aspects, and it's all deteriorating. And what happens when they go? These are the questions about, we don't know. We don't know how the environment's impacting them, but how are they impacting the environment? All that iron is sitting next to coral reefs. So before the oil goes, is that iron creating new reef systems? Well, yeah, because on the ships themselves, they have become covered in reef. So we know that the shipwreck itself becomes food for the coral in some degrees. That's that interaction. Then you come up to shallow water sites. This is where we kind of really have our fun. This is where we're going to try to get you guys out to it, and this is what we can get access to, if we can get access to these sites.
Do this to me.
Yeah, sorry, it does it to me too, and I keep talking about that, and my students look, hey, what about that one? This is the city of Taunton down in Somerset. That's over there, Fall River and Battlefield Cove, if you've been down there, is just on the other side of that bridge. These are great sites because the tide comes in and gives you a little bit of treachery of, you're racing against time like you would be underwater, and then it goes back out and you can see what you actually were able to map. And you have all the coordinates right there. Now, it's not just that. Vic does a lot of heritage, and I threw these at him because sometimes, as he said, it's not the big famous wrecks. It's sometimes what looks like eyesores or landscape survey. I'll deal with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
I
Vic.
just smacked it.
It'll be good once we get through the site types.
No, I mean, this is probably what you've seen around here until they did a lot of cleanups, is abandoned vessels in the marsh. You see it like on the news the other day, sailboats on not Castle Island, it is Castle Island Beach there in South Boston. It's abandoned for a short time, but sometimes it's just abandoned. And I'm hooked on all these different kind of reality shows like the one in Alaska, and there's beaches where people just dump their boats. There's a Chelsea Creek, which we do site work on, and that has at least 7 vessels, or components of vessels, along the creek. Hard to get to, it's all private access, and it's kind of polluted. So I kind of even though I've been there, I don't like to get out there too much, but that disposal is a practice that we try to study as well on vessels. So other site types, submerged landscapes, which is what I deal with, like the wind farm. We're looking for ancient landscapes when people were here, after the glaciers retreated. So you're looking at 12,000 years. Yeah. But submerged landscapes even here are important. And if you go to, I don't know if I think it's Black Beach as opposed to White Beach in Manchester, Magnolia. One of the beaches, you can actually, at certain tides, you can see peat coming out, so layers of peat. Sometimes some brush sticking up, looks like stumps, not big stumps, small stumps. That was an ancient landscape probably about 2,000 years ago that was fresh water. That as the sea changes and changes that landscape, it got covered over, salt water comes in, and there's a freshwater pond behind, but now you've got this 2,000-year-old landscape showing up. So you know that it used to be a swamp. We don't have any of these kind of settlement sites that I'm aware of.
Billington?
No, I haven't seen anything like this.
I'm just waiting for it to jump ahead.
So,
Oh,
go ahead. No,
No, good. So actually, when I got my start, it wasn't on a ship. There you go. That's as long as we were able to keep the middle schoolers' attention. I got it over in Israel. As I mentioned, I was teaching Latin and Greek at a private school right up the road in Dedham. And I was like, is that really what I want to do with my career? And I had just learned how to dive. I got my open water, and I was looking through things, archaeological sites. I was thinking about doing Roman and a fort up in England, and then I saw this cool opportunity to go to Caesarea in Israel. And it was built in 1st century BCE by King Herod, and it was the home of the Roman governors, including Pontius Pilate. They have a stele with Pontius Pilates that was recovered, and it's a man-made harbor. This one right here, because Israel doesn't have a natural harbor, and so the Romans had built this thing called hydraulic cement that actually hardens when it's in ocean water, and they built it, and it was their main port. So during this whole time, the Roman governors, the Roman representatives loved this because it was a little mini Rome. It had a Colosseum, it had a racetrack, it had a theater, and they hated to go to Jerusalem because Jerusalem was crowdy, dirty, and they preferred the fresh, open breezes of the ocean, and they would write about this. And this whole area has been excavated and combined on land and at sea. And I remember they gave me this, what's called an underwater dredge, and I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't really care. I was just really excited. And a Roman oil lamp fell in my hand. And that was when I was hooked, because I could have been the first person in 2,000 years to be touching this artifact. And then I realized I could be the first person in 2,000 years to be touching this artifact, and that was well above my pay grade. So I put it down and got people to come take a look at it. The other nice part about it is by 8 a.m. it was 105 degrees in the summer, and while my land-based component people were out there sweating, and I would just hop in the water and cool off, and I really appreciated that aspect of maritime archaeology, I'll admit. Yep. And then this is going to flip, but I'll let you, because you deal with this all the time too.
Yeah, so the industrial landscape. So I think here, you don't probably see it anymore, but there were tidal sawmills and granaries right along the shoreline here, because every creek, like on Cape Ann, almost every creek, no matter how small, generated enough energy to put a mill on it, so that they could actually do the milling there. So those are kind of sites. There's one in West Gloucester that's sort of visible. I'm trying to think what street it is, but there's one in West Gloucester that you can actually go to, and at low tide you'll see the stone structure all along the base of that creek, where it's all dried out because the tide is retracted. So these tidal mills, harbor structures in general, New Bedford, we've been studying the construction there, how they built the wharfs. Boston Harbor, they've done the same thing. Most of the time, in my career, it's been, all right, can we avoid it, or who do we have to get to document it for compliance? And that's what a lot of the underwater archaeology I dealt with was compliance. So mills, they're going to take the mill dam down, because they're going to open it up for restoration for fisheries. Okay, how is it built? That's my question. And one of them, we found the cribs, where they basically make squares out of wood and fill them with stone as the base. And another place we found corduroy, which is, usually it's stone logs that are put down to make roads, but in this case it was stone, more like branches, so they really weren't logs. They were maybe 4 or 5 inches in diameter at the most, mostly 1 or 2 inches, placed down there right along the edge of the structure that was a gate, a tidal gate, so they could actually construct it, because it was pudding mud. It was so soft. Stepping off of those, you had to have someone there to make sure you could get out. The Native American history, we get fish weirs, and this is different than we have here. Many times here you'll also find, like I'm talking about, stone across a creek for a mill pond. Stone across a creek, and people say it's a fish weir. Actually, it's the base of a fish weir. Typically what they would do is put stone down to anchor branches, and they'd push the branches in so as the fish, and try to let this fish come up or go back down. Especially now, there's a herring run festival down in Middleborough, so herring was a big indigenous food source. They put this in, so once the fish came up, they were trapped, and you could then scoop them out, use hooks, spear them, what have you. This looks like northwest coast.
Mm-hmm. And then aircraft, been working a lot with this, especially again, as I mentioned, with DPAA. It's primarily our type of archaeological site. When we look for like shipwrecks, we have techniques like side scan sonar using acoustic imagery or magnetometers that measure ferrous material. The problem with planes is they're not ships, and they're flying at high velocity, so it's like a high impact automobile accident, and they're made of aluminum. So it's a very weak material, and so they break apart and they scatter over large areas. So our traditional techniques of finding shipwrecks are proving very difficult unless you have this is nice, you could pick this one out. But a accident pattern of a plane wreck is very, very different as we're looking for the downed pilots. It's also made of aluminum, so there's very little iron. The engines have iron components, but they're generally very small compared to, of course, a ship. So this is that new field developing of kind of going back and looking at technology and how we can build a better metal detector, right? How can we improve our techniques to find small pieces of aircraft in order to recover? And the mission here isn't so we know more about the plane. We know all we need to know about World War II aircraft. There's manuals and manuals and manuals. The recovery here is about the people. So it's a little different aspect. But in doing that, we turn to other sciences. NASA, for example, deep water technologies, deep water mining. And in this kind of diagram, one of the reasons we show maritime archaeology, or we call it maritime archaeology, let's pull all of it up. There we go. The reason I use it, or we use the term maritime archaeology, is because those other terms that you saw earlier are very definitive and have a focus. But this diagram kind of shows is what we're interested most of all is how people, let's go right here because I want to get to this slide. We're interested in the full range of people's activities at sea and around the sea, not just on the ocean, not just shipwrecks, not just under the water, sometimes above the water, sometimes next to the water, sometimes managing the water. We're interested in people. And therefore, here's our definition. Maritime archaeology is a scientific study of the past remains of all aspects. Also, we want to create new jobs. Of all aspects of seafaring cultures, including social, political, religious, economic. Massachusetts is a wonderful state, right? The Bay State, lots of bays, ocean areas, people from Stow, rivers, ponds, lakes, intertidal areas. And what I like to say, coming back to this slide here, is I'm not a shipwreck person. I'm a people person. And what maritime archaeology, if you don't take anything away for our first break here, everything we show you is not about the shipwreck. It's about how we figure out what the shipwreck is telling us about the people. If you start with that, then that's what archaeology is. Because it's part of anthropology, it's part of history, and both of those have a humanitarian emphasis. We use science, we use technology, we use diving, we use methodology, not for the artifact, but for what it can tell us. And if we don't have the question of what it can tell us or why we're looking, then what we're doing is either a recreational activity or a waste of money. We're not interested in finding things. We're interested in finding things in order to understand why they were there and what they can tell us about the people who made them, used them, and shared them with us through time. And one way to look at this is the ocean or the waterways here, whatever's on the bottom is the world's largest living museum. Just really hard to access. Right? It's a huge kind of admissions fee. You either have to learn how to dive or learn how to use machinery to get down to there. But possibly 3 million, possibly more, tangible artifacts tell us about the past. And it's a really important story to tell as we go through, because it can be conflict, it can be everyday items that semi-trucks of the day, the schooners, but they're not written in history books, or they're glossed over. And the other part I sometimes say is archaeology and maritime archaeology is a chance to talk about forgotten history. So if you have a family member, if you have an industry that's often overlooked, you will find it in an archaeological site. Coal schooners, thousands of them, as you just said. Well, each one had a captain. Each one had a crew. These were workers. Same as you go to your job today. Maybe you'll be written about in history books. I probably won't. But I work with people every single day. And those ships, it's hard to think about now because we have cars, planes, and digital technology. But 100 years ago, if you went in Boston, you wouldn't see roads. You'd see a forest of ships lined up along this, right? This would all be crowded, and that would be your highway. And they were just going to their jobs every day. So one of the great honors and joys of the field is getting that privilege to map that and understand that like no one else would be able to. So that's why I say, maritime market, whatever you think about, or remember, a shipwreck is a failure and a loss. Somebody's loss, very tragic. And the archaeology is about figuring that out for the future generations. What I like about archaeology is when you actually start to dig into it, it's pretty common sense. It's like, well, yeah, that's what we do. And so some of these terms that you'll see up here as I'm looking at it, we've already talked about. And it's really best, how do we go about then taking the artifacts and creating some kind of analysis through that? So Vic has talked about of much of this as he was describing it. We have structures and features, that's the actual shipwreck. It could also be the artifact itself. There's lots of flexibility. Contents, that's the material culture inside. We have slides coming up about that. And then what's going on around the site. And terrestrial, it's pretty dynamic. You start to dig down, you only have to go a few centimeters before you're dealing with thousands of years. A shipwreck or something that comes onto the seafloor, it's not supposed to be there. It's an intrusion, and so you have a limited amount of kind of horizons or scopes. But you can see this picture has something called site formation, and that's what Vic was going to maybe talk about with it. What is a wreck, right? What does a wreck look like? Very different than what a ship is. I like to point that out. So, especially in Massachusetts, you've seen this all over the place.
Right. And just so that you feel local, that's Steep Hill Beach. That wreck is on Steep Hill Beach. It's the Ada K. Dave, and that was the first site we taught field school on.
We'll have some slides coming up with that with historical records. Yeah.
Right. It's just so you get that classic. This is what most beach wrecks look like, which is kind of nice. Actually, see that it's a ship.
Lots of times it's just material culture. So some terms, artifacts, anything made by people, right? An archaeological site, as Vic said, it's any type of human activity. So everything in here is an artifact and a site at some point. Ecofacts, these are the non-human made things, but clearly associated. That's why we don't study dinosaurs, but we do study animals and butcher marks or pollen analysis, parasite eggs, human waste. Ancient human waste has its own name. Corpolite. That's medical waste, just like today doctors use quite a bit of information from that.
Yeah, and just so to give you a real world example, so as I said, I work on a wind farm for a company that does that, and in one of their samples they got a bone. It was definitely an animal bone, pretty clearly, but it had to be determined as animal. And then because it was found in a core sample, they thought, whoa, this has got to be ancient landscape. So it had to be examined in very much detail early on. In determined dating, it was like, oh, they found it's sheep. Well, it's no local sheep. So my immediate reaction is, it's not. It's from a vessel. It's just trash thrown over. But the tribes were kind of concerned. On examining the bone, you could actually see the cut marks, which were from a saw. So you could actually see those striations across the bone to know that it was modern. There's probably some fishing. These guys supposed to have had mutton for dinner one night, and that's what was left, and they dumped it, which we do all the time. People historically dump waste.
Well,
It helped date that.
Yeah, and we had a similar situation. You just reminded me of on one of the planes we were working on. In DPA, we call them osseous remains. You don't say ever human remains, and here's why. We thought we found some remains, and we were really excited because this would point us that possibly we had a recovery in action. And instead of just jumping to that conclusion, and we were very excited, but you sent it back to the lab in DC, or in Hawaii, excuse me, and they came back and it was turtle remains. Likely a fisherman. We don't think a turtle swam under there because we didn't find anything other. There was no shell. There was no other skeletons. It was just little knuckle-looking bones that looked very like a person. And what you were just saying, probably a local fisherman was sitting there and had turtle soup or turtle something of meat, threw it over and got collected under there. So you can have these eco-facts that intrude and create a different interpretation. So context, this is probably for me the most important concept. I think context in our daily lives is also one of the most important concepts. If you hear the word fine, it's one of the most dangerous words in the English language. How are you doing? I'm fine. How are you doing? I'm fine. How are you doing? I'm fine. Those three different inflection points, depending on context, will let you know if your wife wants to have a nice conversation or a serious conversation. Are you in trouble or not? A joke is funny in context. Out of context, at best, you don't understand it. At worst, it's offensive. Stories make sense in context. We're all familiar with that. Right? When somebody quotes you out of context, they can manipulate your thoughts. When you record a site out of context, you're manipulating the past. And context is based on several different factors, but the ones we're talking about, provenience, kind of what I call the graph paper, the X and Y. Where are things in space? Everything here right now. If I overturn a table, it's in a different provenience, right? It's a different place. And association. What are those aspects? What are those artifacts with? And what does that tell you? And this is just an official definition, but Vic, I know, has lots of experience and also lots of experience of misinterpretation and when people come to him, he gets this all the time at the Robbins Museum, when people come to them with artifacts. What's the problem?
Rocks.
Yeah, so talk about like what happens when it's out of context. Yeah.
It's really, it's funny because, people don't really understand. It is that relationship. I have to know where it came from. Just saying it came off the ship, for example, doesn't mean anything. But if you found the binnacle and you just bring it in, oh, that's great. You get the binnacle of the wheel. Where'd you get it? Off the shipwreck. I really would like to have known where the stern was on the vessel. Because sometimes when you go down and look at something, what remains, it's almost like shipwrecks, especially older ones, the stern is actually, as you get towards the bilge, is really pointy. And the bow is really blunt, because just the way vessel design is. And having that would have known where you found that would help. From the museum, from doing pre-contact archaeology, people bring in pointy rocks. And I'm serious, pointy rocks. Shaped like an art, it looks like it could be a chop or whatever, but I have to do two things. One is, where did you find it? What was with it? Because that helps me decide, is it really an artifact or is it natural? We had a woman bring in milk carton crates of pointy rocks. Came from a foundation, an under foundation of a colonial home. They weren't artifacts in the sense of, they weren't Native American artifacts. Those are what we call clinkers. You'd use to fill in the gaps in the stone in the foundation, but you couldn't accept that as the example because they had that sort of chopper shape. So it has to find it. Something we call a hoe that they use, ancient Native American stone hoes. If you find a flat stone, it could have been a hoe, just a flat stone. But if you found it with some other objects, then we might say, yeah, you definitely found a hoe. And we actually at the museum had a display of all these hoes, finally took it down because that's all, it doesn't tell you anything. It's just from a site that they found other artifacts and they had a lot of hoes, but it has to be that association. So even like, it's not like you can take a timber off a vessel and I can do DNA and say, it is a two-masted schooner. People have to understand that you need more information. And many times, when you take and recover the object, you've changed the context. You can't actually go back and put it where you found it.
So that's why we get kind of really persnickety, especially on sites where things aren't picked up and moved, or lots of good intentions. Oh, we found this on a wreck. It's now just kind of an artifact by itself and won't tell us what we need because it's out of context. And actually in archaeology, especially in land sites, we say we kill our patient. Once you start digging, you can't undo what you've done. So you have to document the way down. That gets into these two different, very foundational dating techniques, relative chronology and absolute chronology. Basically, the first one is, if we use our kind of family analogy here, how many people have an older sibling? All right, so I know you were born after your older sibling, right? You're younger, but I don't know the age. That's relative. It's a relative, but it's also, I can only describe a relationship based on younger and older. But if I'm gonna ask Vic, you're younger?
Yes,
How old is your older sibling?
5 years older.
5 years older, so born 5 years before Vic. That's absolute chronology. I can provide a date range. How we do that? Well, relative chronology starts first because of principles of stratigraphy and association, the law of superposition. Vic mentioned that, we steal from other disciplines all the time. The first one was geology, and then a little bit with biology, but looking at the Grand Canyon, looking out west, people noticed striations in rocks and started to figure out where things were and came up with stuff on the bottom is older than things at the top, like your laundry basket, right? Or your garbage, stuff at the bottom you threw away, and you have striations. So that's the first one, law of superposition. Stratigraphy is the layers of rock or strata. And all things being equal, this is a nice little picture right here. Never happens like that, right? Everything's nice and horizontal and like a layer cake. You do exactly, 1 is just recent and 7 is very old. Earth doesn't do that. It does all this and moves it around, and it's really challenging. The second law, I should put that in other order, actually. I should put this, the law of association. I need to put that down. It basically states that artifacts in the same layer are associated, meaning they have a relationship, meaning they might not have known each other, but they're at the same time period. Right? I don't know if this jawbone and that skull in layer 6, these were friends, but I know they existed at the same time. And in good condition, the strata preserves that very well, and we can start to create a seriation or a typology. I use this slide. It was one of my favorite mistakes I've ever made when I typed in history of nails, chronology of nails, and the picture on the bottom right came up first on my Google image chart of females' nails. And I thought, oh, that's actually very true. And even today with acrylics and designs, but really, when we take a look at it, another way to think about this is popular trends, fads. Yeah, there you go, right there, right? Little nails on yeah, exactly, decorations. Pop culture is a great way to understand seriation. Right? Who was popular in the 1980s? Who was popular in the 1990s? Who was popular today? Who's the most famous pop star today? Probably dominates it. Yeah, I'm looking to the young guys.
Don't look at me.
Yeah. Who's the most famous singer, pop star that you would say? See if I guess it.
Nikki, we're all looking at you. 'Cause you're going to say it.
Ah,
Yeah,
no.
you
Oh,
guys
I
know.
have to say it?
Yeah.
No, you don't. It can be anything. Yeah, I'm just curious.
What's your favorite? Like Taylor Swift?
There you go, right there. That's who I was going. That's where, but everybody, even I would have said that, and I'm not, we're outside the edge. But Taylor Swift dominates economics and kind of popular trends. She's viral and everything. Madonna in the 1980s.
That's after my time.
Yeah, well, I was going back to the 1880s.
He's getting the Frank Sinatra.
Frank Sinatra, 1960s, Aretha Franklin. Point is that seriation, what it is there is an introduction of their beginning, and then it becomes super popular. 10 years from now, it's going to be somebody other than Taylor Swift who will pick up that mantle. Same thing with artifact and material culture. As we progress, another good one is your smartphones. If I did a flip phone right now, you knew I didn't get it in 2025, it would be, they're coming back. Retro, there's always the retro intrusions. Hand-wrought nails are actually what I was looking for, because homes, carpentry, and nails. First iron, it lasts, right? And you can see over time that you have a kind of progression of technique. Hand-wrought nails by hand before 1800s. That's the nice thing. Like pop culture, I know there's a new Michael Jackson movie coming out, and you know that it's going to be from the 1980s through, I don't know when they're going to stop, but it's going to be late 80s, or late 20th century. find that hand-wrought nail right there, you can start to date it as early 1800. Pipe stems are another good, ceramics. But humans have this consistent pattern in our behavior. We like trends. Some trends last hundreds of years, but there's going to be a change in that. And that's called seriation. Right. How do things change over a series? And you could put that in different types. When we find an artifact on a site, this is that very fundamental kind of concept. How do we analyze it? How do we know where it fits in? Vic just mentioned it too. He was able to coordinate some of the artifacts to figure out, where they came from. And now ships, of course, I just put this one in here because the evolution of the Enterprise over time. Enterprise is one of the most famous names in ship's history, starting in 1775, Benedict Arnold, going through 1776, 1851, and then going all the way to 2024 with the with the Enterprise and Star Trek, if you're not familiar with that ship at the end. So Vic, you'd like that. The first space shuttle was called Enterprise as well. But a little bit more historic and ceramics. Yeah. If you've ever been on an archaeoterrestrial site, your first ceramic potsherd is exciting. Your thousandth, you wish you would stop finding them. Ceramic fired earth is one of the most durable substances other than plastics that humans have ever created. Unfortunately, it always comes in thousands of little pieces because what we make of fired earth is not durable. It breaks and shatters. But those pieces all have to be accounted for, and typology's own specialization. And this is a good specialization in archaeology where you know historical aspects. So
What you do use, design is important.
oh yeah.
That gives chronology.
Mm-hmm.
And manufacturer, if you can get manufacturer with it. So we had a wreck in Boston Harbor that piece came out, it's about this big. It looked like a vase, maybe a little bit shorter than the coffee cups. But when we looking at it, we couldn't figure it out. It would last longer because iron rots much faster than the wood. And so certain techniques just stay on and get reused in designs. If it's good, they do get modified, but how much do they get modified and what's that time frame of modification? I'm not a nautical archaeologist.
Okay.
Boat frames, they're great, it's got frames, it actually has frames, ribs in it, as opposed to the one over here or by there's a gazebo over on the other side of the harbor. There's a frame in there, has no ribs. There's a set of planks that's shaped like a lozenge, like a shipwreck. Has no ribs. We dug it out. It has no ribs. What was it? It's probably some kind of pontoon that they used in some construction, and that was it. They just didn't need it anymore. I don't know. I went off the tangent there on your question, but it becomes difficult to really tie it in date-wise. But we know that some techniques don't end. They just keep doing. The adventure, what's the other one? Well, then they do the replicas like the Fame and the Friendship.
Or Lannon.
Yeah, they're replicas, but they're trying to get back at a certain era, except it's visually that vessel, interior is not, and it's got an engine.
So the Constitution, and these are really good because what you're talking about is a continuation but different use types. Right? What was its primary use, secondary use, and again, recycling and reusing aspects of it. Again, you have to see that all the time in retro equipment. You might have a 45 record player, right? You like vinyl. It's not popular right now. It's streaming. You see more people streaming content than using a vinyl record player. But that,
It's coming back.
Yeah.
because of that heritage concept, but it won't be the popular, it's that niche concept of what used to be, and there's tangible aspects of it. So another part of this is heritage studies and heritage use. Heritage isn't a thing, it's a process. How we use the past for the present. How do we play it? And the Constitution is a great example. Technically still a warship, but it's still an act of worship. It's the only warship, well, maybe I don't know what happened today.
Oldest
I
warship
believe
now.
it's the oldest commissioned warship in the USA.
Right, and the only one that's seen active duty in actual naval engagement.
There's a sub now that has it.
Okay, that's what I was
Yes.
thank
It sank
you.
a frigate like 2 weeks ago.
Okay, that's where I knew but up until recently. But you would have to admit that we get to the Constitution as defending our Navy, we've probably gone to a very bad place, right? If we're pulling out the sails and the cannons, we've entered into a point of our own situation where our primary weaponry hasn't availed. So it's really a museum ship. It's a living history ship. It's a training ship. It's in its secondary use. And in that, it has its own new lifespan as well, and probably at the forefront of it are these other ones as well. And we talk about authenticity, there's no original boards on the Constitution. They've all been replaced. So is it the original Constitution? Well, if it was, you'd fall through and you'd have lots of problems.
Like the Constellation.
So it gets into those esoteric kind of what is heritage, what's authenticity, and do people care?
Yeah.
So that's a whole different range, but it's a really fascinating thing. What do you do with these outliers, right? Sometimes an outlier, that phrase is an outlier is the exception that proves the rule. We have popular artists who come back in time, the Beatles, the Stones. I'm using just my own biases. They've been out of print for many years, but they'll always make a comeback. You always have a new documentary because there's that connection to the past. So it's a really fascinating subject, and it's a little bit different with seriation as that we look for quantity. And so you can see there's not many constitutions still out there. There's one. So it becomes its own unique resource versus at the time of 1770 were frigates and fighting. There were 4 of the Constitution class built, but as far as fighting, or as we're going to see, wooden schooners, there's less and less of them. So, but it is a really good point because you have them reused. So absolute chronology, this is the second category, and this is the one that provides a date range. And I'm starting with historical association because we're lucky a little bit, unless we're doing pre-contact sites or, again, sites that have low documentation, we do have with shipwrecks, kind of the advantage of, if we can't find the wreck itself and we can figure out where it was from, we can get some context. Eyewitness accounts, newspapers, primary, secondary sources, and then all of these off to the side are possible examples that we can dive into the minds of the people with kind of caveats that everybody presents their own agenda. And Vic and I worked on one of these. He just mentioned the Ada K. Damon. And what's great is not just the shipwreck, when I talk about people, knowing there's historical newspaper prints of when it sank and what was going on. And to me, the fascinating is the context around this because we have access to local newspapers, the Christmas storm of 1909. So Ada K. Damon is a schooner that was a sand schooner. It had a previous life before as a transport, and this guy, Brewster, I think I have slides coming up to talk about it, but he hires it as a midlife crisis. He's in his 40s and he didn't like what he was doing. He was working in Boston and he decides, sand. I'm going to buy this old schooner and I'm going to strip it out and I'll go to Plum Island and put sand in it. Then I had the question of well, why? Why did he want sand from Plum Island? I had one and I'm like, because we needed it for cement. He's like, yeah, but different sand in different places have different reasons. And I was like, this is really, I went to him after the talk, and he's like, I worked in cement for 40 years. He works with sand. He was part of the industry. This is that connection, somebody came up. So I did a little research, and the sand from Plum Island in the early 20th century was being used in a specific type of cement for fireproof buildings. It was a new one, and Plum Island had the right grain, and it was in a recipe. I found a recipe for that. And so his question brought me to this, but I digress. This Christmas storm, it's one of our classic New England's perfect storms that seem to come through, just like we kind of had in February, wipes out all of these different wrecks and costs. The Ada K. Damon, Plum Island, Massachusetts. we know exactly what happened. Kind of, we can do a chronology of what was going on based on primary sources. This is the Coast Guard report. Parted her anchor chains on the 26th, and don't have the picture right here, but
You do, it's right under here.
oh man, that's just, yeah. I thought I had the picture we had on the beach before.
Yeah.
That's the result of that. And I have a good slide of it breaking down over the years, but I just looked and I don't know where it went. So, Vic, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well,
Yeah, on his history.
So shipwrecks in 1909, and he tries to refloat it, he can't. So the salvage, it has to be sold off as for salvage. I don't even think he got enough money back from that. He
It was a
basically becomes a
loss.
farmer in Maine after this. But it just sits there. They've taken off all the rigging, because you can resell the rigging. Rigging has value, sails have value, but a lot of the structure, the masts were taken down. But we have photographs of this over time, just sat on the beach. So the Crane estate, the Crane family used to invite the town in for parties. Always. Every summer they had a picnic there, and there are photographs of the vessel remains with people hanging over it. And over time you see there's no stern anymore, but there's a bow and there's part of a bowsprit, and then that's gone. And eventually we hear about it. I heard about it in 2004, 2005, and went out and looked at it, because it used to disappear for 10-year periods or so on the sand beach. People knew about it, but it sand over. We were going to do, this is not with Calvin, this is an earlier teaching program. We're going to do a summer camp on it. Summer comes around, completely sanded over. We can't even find where it is on the beach. Then when we talked about beach wrecks, it started to show up again, and then we taught on it for several years, and it would completely sand in every day. We dig it out and try to do some measurements, look at the structure. We actually tried to open up the bow more so that a shipwright could take a look at it, because he wanted to get some ideas, and it turned out that it was built by one of Harold Burnham's ancestors, so it was kind of a family tie. Time goes along, it sands over again. We go to another site. The storm of, was it 88, 89? No, not 88. 2010, we had a really bad winter storm, came in, splayed it open more. Vessel, what happens with vessels is the heat, as they rot, they go from having that shape to they start splaying out. Well, in this case, it was starting to get dragged seaward, half of it, just split it. And then parts started coming off, and people collected what they should off the beach because they want pieces. But anyway, she's now gone. She's probably buried in that, and I use she because that's the way I was trained. Vessels are she's, because they're always in charge of your life. And so that vessel's completely gone, and basically, but this information tells us what happened. And then as we looked at the photographs, you can also see the evolution of Steep Hill and how it was forested, how it was deforested, how the sand dunes behind it were much higher and now much lower. So you can see the effects of climate change on that property, as well as the effects of climate change on that site. So it tells a lot more than just this poor guy's life story and how he lost everything.
But the historical research, and I tell my students, literature review is absolutely required. It's not just going back through and reading what other people have said. It's actually pretty exciting when you get into it. Rewards can be really great. First of all, with historic sources, if you haven't had a chance to read a old newspaper, they are fantastic. Because they're just like regular stuff today. Everything that we're fighting about right now, you change the terms and maybe the details, and it's the same themes, like left, right, up, down. No one could agree on anything. One thing you will notice if you go back to like the 1880s and the 1900s is that instead of wrecks or deaths, fatalities on the road, you have reports on shipwrecks all over the place. And here's the other part. They have shipwreck sales. things that were recovered. You will have announcements for marketplace from the latest wreck. And I'm not talking one or two, I'm talking pages and pages of it as you're kind of, whoa, it's a full different world. See, and you get into it. It's also why historians are some of the maybe sometimes not the most exciting people to talk to, because they live in this world from 1908 and get into these, invested in these people, and no one else has done that research. So you get the context of where they're coming from and why these were so frequent in the words. It can be challenging, of course, because on the other end of it, you might think there's going to be a lot of data. And this comes up all the time, and you do a search and you're like, I can't find any information. I can't believe it. No one has written about this. That tells you you're on the right track, because maybe your question needs to be addressed. In the field, and Vic has done this a lot, he's helped me, he's like, I don't think there's anything there. It'd be kind of bad use of time, especially archaeology. There's a lot of water out there, and not all of it has a wreck. And you can avoid a lot of fruitless hours. But my favorite one is the networking, because as I said, I'm a people person when we start doing research. And you know this, you've networked here, good networking, we're all here because of your efforts. And when you do historical and you get into that, you meet very interesting people who will go out of their way to help you and give you a lot more information. And then you get to know them, just like even just hearing about Rob Collins at Stow. Those pieces of information are really exciting. Dendrochronology, especially with wood boots.
Yeah, well, like the deco canoes, we actually have dendrochronological samples. We took cores. We took 2 cores. Only one could be dated because a certain person kind of dropped the other one from the core into the lake as opposed to into the little tube that we're taking out. The chronology came back 1640 to 1680. And in the 1660s, there's a law passed by the general court not allowing the use of dugout canoes. So the question then becomes, were these purposely sunk at that time period? Because they date, this one dates that. The other 2 that we found could date older. In fact, we think there are multiple other vessels. But using the chronology, basically, that the dendro can really tie in the date to year as opposed to years, because radiocarbon dating is range. And that picture Calvin showed, that actually dated that vessel to the time period where they thought it was from.
This is interesting. We had some corrupted, so it was a combination of that and radiocarbon. But this is Aoife Daly, who's from University of Copenhagen or Denmark. And there's Vic, and this is down at the Pilgrim Hall Museum. And this is the oldest shipwreck in New England. It's called the Sparrowhawk, if it is the Sparrowhawk, identity's hard. And the story is that in 1626, a group from England, including some Irish sailors, were going down to Virginia, very much like the Mayflower, and ran into a storm because they always left in the winter, which is not the best time to make it there. Ran off Cape Cod, rescued by William Bradford and the Plymouth colony, and lived there for a few months. Their vessel, the Sparrowhawk, not named the Sparrowhawk, in a bit of wonderful marketing, it was re-exposed in 1862 on the land of a gentleman named John Sparrow, who then told the investigators from Boston that, oh, this is the ancient Sparrowhawk written in the Bradford's journal, which wasn't named, and therefore got his family connected to this title. I don't really know the name of the original one. It was just said a little of a pinnace or a boat. In any case, it had never been looked at or analyzed as far as the timber. So we, in 2018, brought Aoife over and did some coring and did some dendrochronology. But there had been no preservation, and actually it's remarkable for a possible 400-year-old vessel that the wood timbers were in such good shape. But we had to combine it. She was great. She used radiocarbon to consolidate and compare, and what it came was that the timbers had been at least cut, none of them had been cut after 1626. Right, so that was good. So we're in the right ballpark. And some of them had been from 1550, possibly. So there was a date range. So evidence indicates it is the one that brought the first Irish immigrants
If
over.
you go back one slide, I think I'm wearing the same shirt.
A little bit of the ship construction to show you how,
Yeah.
like, so here's the keelson right here, and this is where the mast would have been stepped. So you see that, so you're looking, I mean, this is the actual parts of that vessel itself. And, you know, the frames we have laid out, so you can kind of see the shape of the thing from, from the stern up to the bow, and they've been built up. They had floating chocks and frames that were basically Y-cut, this would have been holding the, you know, the planks. And very intimate and very beautiful woodwork.
And I don't know if you know what a step is. That's where the mast actually is fastened to the keel. So just so you may not know. I mean, me, it was like, oh, that's interesting. What's a step? No. At that point, I knew what a step was. But.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But you can see why we consider this. Sometimes people talk about the bones. It looks like a skeleton, right? Laid out like that. You have the ribs, the stern, and
It's basically like a human skeleton.
yeah. Up until that point, it had never been dated to the. It could have been from 1700s, right? And so the story was from this wreck by Bradford, 1626. It was discovered in 1860, and then it had a life where it went to Boston Commons for a little bit. It went down to Rhode Island for a little bit. It went to various museums.
On display.
On display.
Open air display.
Yeah. So some of these timbers are even in existence. It's pretty remarkable. And it's been in people's garages, their horse stables, and moved around. And actually, talk about life of a ship. In this, what you really see on the timbers now, you see some cut marks on it when it was built, but what you see more often are when it was assembled. There are bolt holes all over it on different assembly periods, and you can see
Everyone who reassembled it.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, and you can see, and they have different naming systems because no one, like IKEA with the directions, somebody lost those and probably had extra pieces, right? So they have all different numbers on their frames, from letters to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and what it really is really the reassembling, history of the reassembling. It's kind of, when we were going through it, we talked about different lives, so it's interesting. Radiocarbon, I get that question a lot, like, did you radiocarbon date the wreck? I'll say this, it's an effective tool, but for ships it has a huge problem, that there's a plus or minus error of about 150 years. So it's great for things that are, you know, older than hundreds of years, but when you have a ship and then you go 1860 plus or minus 150 years, that's a pretty big range of interpretation. But radiocarbon, I like to say that, you know, we all have a superpower, we just can't release it until we have died. We're all organic, we all have carbon in it, and then we're absorbing radiation into something called C14, carbon 14. All organic materials have it, and it's really helped with dating things up to 50,000 years. And when we figured this out, it opened up absolute chronology, especially with paleosites, right? Paleosites, the whole area of early Native American history took off because it has a half-life, I won't go into detail, but basically every 5,000 years, the percentage of it decreases. So you don't do that analysis in the field. You find an organic bone, you send it off, and somebody goes, oh, I think this is about 10,000 years old. What they're measuring is how we decay, right? And carbon-14 is what we're absorbing right now, and as morbidly as we decay, we give off trace isotopes of that. And this whole field develops not because of archaeology, but because of petroleum and oil. And they kind of work through this and understand that organic material, plants, ferns, areas, you can get a sense of where there's ages of the fields. And archaeology absorbs, pun intended, all this. And as I said, it's great for material that is, you know, I would say 1000 BC, or 1,000 years and before. It's not great for shipwrecks because of that plus or minus 150. But inevitably, always somebody goes, did you radiocarbon date that? And the best way for wooden ships is dendrochronology. Aoife, as I mentioned, we had such bad samples. What she did is she took the dendrochronology and then collated it with the, she did radiocarbon date it and was able to kind of minimize that error to 70 years, which is still a pretty big chunk, but the nice part is our maximum was still below 1626. So, yeah. That is fundamentals. Archaeology 101 in 2 hours.
Right, and I'll give you the quiz booklets, no.